Good evening. It's my privilege to call to order the Bothell Shorelines Board meeting for Monday, December 10th, 2018, 6 p.m. First order of business isn't on there, but I think we should probably have a roll call. Our board members are present except for board member David Cox and Ann Agard. Dave, did you have anything you wanted to say before I go to item number 2 on the agenda?
No, go right ahead.
Okay. So the second item on our agenda is non-agenda public comments. This is an opportunity for members of the audience to address the commission on a topic not on this meeting's agenda. If you could, please limit your comments to 3 minutes per speaker. Do we have anybody present who would like to address the board? No. Okay. So no public comment. Approval of minutes. We have received them in email. Dave, do we have them in our packet here or in the notebook?
Yes, they are in the packet, along with the attached amended bylaws.
So why don't we actually, can we table this and come back when Ann is here? Because she, as the secretary, was supposed to have reviewed things in our behalf. So why don't we just move on? We'll come back to item number 3.
Okay.
Item number 4 is new business. Is there any new business?
I have none.
Okay. Are you, do you have your mic pushed, please?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Is it red?
Thank you. There we go. Patrick, when would be the best time to discuss a question that Dave Boyd brought up, which was he wanted us to collectively decide on questions that we'd have for him and the consultant.
Okay.
But my question is, what's the best way to do this? Because we can't hit reply all on our emails.
Right. That's a good question, Dave. We discuss that under new business then?
I was going to get into that under old business, but we can.
Okay, we'll cover it under old business.
Perfect, thank you.
And if you wouldn't mind, that's got David's name plate there. We can switch him probably. Why don't we do that?
Oh, do you want me to switch plates
No,
or you want me
it's
over
up,
there?
it's up to you. Where would you like
I
to
don't
sit?
care.
Either way works.
Have a seat.
Let the record reflect that Ann Agard has joined the meeting.
If we don't go alphabetically, we're okay.
You should be at the beginning, no matter what. How are you?
Okay, so we are past new business. We'll cover Sarah's question in old business, and now it's time for the public hearing. Go ahead, or there's none. So study session. Now I'll turn it over to Dave Boyd for staff presentation.
Okay, thank you. And let's not forget to get back to approval of the minutes, and we can do that either before or after old business. So tonight we are focused on the code amendments related to the Washington Department of Ecology checklist and the responses to those. So in your packet tonight are is the checklist with the responses that are then followed by the actual proposed code amendments relative to those, the checklist. Remember, as you're reviewing these in January, we're planning to bring forward some additional code amendments just related to some clarification and readability. As I've been going through this, that's one thing that we added to the scope, that we could make some non-substantive changes that just make it the code more usable. And at close to 270 pages, it is a kind of a daunting piece of work for the layperson to understand. So I think if we can make a few little tweaks to help with that, that would be within our scope. So that's coming in January, and so tonight, and then at the end, after we talk about the code amendments, we're going to talk a little bit, very briefly, on the revised draft public participation plan. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Amy Sumi to walk us through the code amendments. If there aren't any other questions, it looks like there is one.
Two things. One is, Dave, I need you to speak up a little more because I'm having trouble hearing you, and I don't know if it's your mic or you,
Okay.
or where I'm sitting. Okay. So that's number one. Secondly, did you do the minutes? Because I do have a couple of suggestions on that.
We were waiting for you to arrive.
Okay.
We're gonna cover it right before we get to old
Okay,
business.
good. Okay.
Okay, so we've got kind of two pieces that it's helpful to look at side by side. So there's the checklist, which we've just sort of reoriented and then added a column that says what your direction was as we understood it, and then a note in red in each of those cells that identifies that, yes, that change was made, or the changes, still to be discussed. More changes might come later as a result. And then in some cases, we added some more detailed footnotes in the body of that checklist, or in that checklist, to explain some items that you had particular questions on during our discussions last time. So I'm not sure if the easiest way is to go through the SMP and just talk about each of the changes, or to go through the checklist. If we go through the checklist, we bounce around in the SMP a little bit since it's not in order. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so we'll just go through the SMP document then. So the way we've structured it is in text that's not underlined. That's original text of the Shoreline Master Program, and we included it just enough to provide context for the change that we did make in response to your feedback. So that's the reason it's like only 13 pages long. Most of that is context. The first change that we made was in just the chapter 1303, the definitions of the Shoreline Master Program, and just an introductory note that we wanted to add that reflects that all of the definitions in the Shoreline Master Program would be subject to update based on the RCW or the Washington Administrative Code. So if there's a specific change in the RCW or the WAC, and that changes a definition you have in your SMP, that definition in the RCW or WAC supersedes whatever's in the SMP. And that isn't going to probably crop up too often. I think most of the definitions are stable. But one example is the section immediately following, where there's a new addition to the definition of development. So we've provided the full definition as it exists right now at the bottom of page 1. And the only change is on page 2, there's a new item E, which just states that dismantling or removing existing structures, if there is no other associated development or redevelopment, is not in itself a development that would trigger a shoreline permit or shoreline review. So if you've got a picnic bench and you want to remove the picnic bench, you don't need to get a permit for that. Also I wanted to add too that at the bottom of each of our suggested changes in response to your feedback is just in a note box that simply references back to why we made that change and where in the checklist that change originated. So that should hopefully help you navigate between the checklist and then the changes that we made. And the second definition that we modified was floodway, and that was simply to clarify that for purposes of shoreline jurisdiction and regulation, the floodway that you are using as a reference is the effective FEMA flood insurance map, not anything that's provisional or in draft state. So it has to be adopted by the city and then is the effective map. Also added just a clarification really that the floodway does not include those lands that are on the upland side of your existing levees, provided those levees do provide protection from flooding. Any questions so far? I guess just feel free to interrupt me as we go along here.
So tonight's a study session, but if we do have recommended changes or questions, we should go ahead and just weigh in tonight, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the next definition change is really just an update. Under the existing Shoreline Master Program, you referenced the 2004 Department of Ecology rating system. That's been changed to the 2014. So several times in the document, you'll just see that we now cite the most recent publication. And this doesn't have any substantive change to how you regulate wetlands because your existing code says, or as revised, when it refers to the rating system, but this just kind of cleans it up. And then we added a new definition of wetlands of high conservation value, and that is part of a change to the type. I'm on the bottom of page 2. Wetlands of high conservation value replaced natural heritage wetlands, which is one of the types of wetlands that might receive a Category 1 rating. And so the RCW and the WAC didn't provide a definition for that, but we've captured that from some other ecology guidance documents just for reference. And yeah, any questions on definitions? Oops, nope, there's one more before we move on. Top
got
of
a
page
question.
3. Oh, sure.
Where are rare sensitive plant populations defined?
Oh, they're a Department of Natural Resources category, and so they have several different classification schemes where they'll identify rare and sensitive, and then they've got a lot of manuals about where you can find them and the sensitivity and those types of things. So if it's helpful, maybe we can add a note here about, or even a definition that identifies how you determine those. Is that what you're
Yeah.
suggesting? Okay. Okay, great. Are there any other questions so far? Okay. On top of page 3, we have a definition that I think Lisa kind of cobbled together from some much lengthier and more confusing language. And so this definition describes what constitutes a WashDOT facility maintenance and safety improvement. And that relates to some new language in a couple different places that sort of provides some relief to WashDOT from different review processes when they're proposing a project that affects a WashDOT maintenance or safety improvement.
And this also responds to some board questions from
Right.
last time around.
Exactly. That was where am I on now? Okay. That was exactly where I was coming from. So I was quickly going to our former checklist over here, which was 2017C. Is that correct? That this is
Yes.
this is
It's a
basically
response to that.
in reference to that.
Yes.
As to, because we had a question regarding what was meant by certain facilities.
Yep.
Okay. So, and this is how, now, where did this language come from? Lisa, is it Lisa?
Yes, that's Lisa. At the top of the definition, we make reference to the RCW 9058-356.
Okay,
And in 2015, the state legislature allowed WashDOT to not have to apply for shoreline permits, provided they meet parameters. And one of those is it has to be maintenance and safety related. And this definition applies, it has to be in the roadway prism, so what's already owned. And then later when we get into the exemptions from a permit, this will show up. You'll see some language that's also in the state law that says that while they can avoid shoreline permits, they have to notify a jurisdiction if the projects cost at least $1 million. So they've tried to put some parameters in that recognize their ability to maintain their roads, but that they need to let the local governments know when it's a major endeavor.
so as following up on that, so I can see where the RCW 4604-560 and so forth, but is the lease or ownership of transit facility and including ancillary transportation facilities, is that from the RCW change also? I guess the question is, are all of these from the RCW change?
Yes, they come from, at the top, that first sentence, 9058, 356.
Okay.
And then when you make your way through the definition, it references in some places other state laws.
Right. So all of these came with that change?
Correct.
And you can see, if you go back and look at your checklist too, there's a footnote with 2017C, and Lisa's provided, as part of that footnote is almost the full language of the RCW from which she extracted and composed our more concise definition.
Yeah, I'm looking at page 2, the one that we looked at last week, and I just don't see the reference. I see the reference to RCW 9058, but I just didn't see the other reference. That's why I was just trying to clarify how much of this was in the actual amendment language, and if there were any that's been added here, any changes. That's my, and I just didn't
We did
check.
not add any facility types.
Okay.
And we're speaking to page 2 of the checklist form that was mailed out last week. Is that what you're looking at? And in terms of we have the checklist that was sent out last week.
Am I looking at the right one?
So I think what you're
Maybe
referring
not.
to, you're referring to the other reference to RCW 4804560. On page 2 of the checklist handout, in the footnotes there, it's under 2A is where you'll find that reference.
I just have got to find this page. I'm not finding it yet, so give me a few minutes. I'm looking for the tiny
Actually, I'm
time.
going to go back so we can all look at it.
Okay,
You got it?
I think I
So
found
that
it.
really
Sorry.
long,
Got it. Thank you. So, I just want to point out, right, this point, I went to the site where we're supposed to find all these things, and I also was in at the city, and no one handed me a packet. I asked for it on Friday, and they said it wasn't ready, and I was in again today, and it wasn't there. And then I went to our special site, and the only thing that was there was the agenda from November 5th. So I would have happily looked it up and checked it, but I couldn't find it anyplace.
Yeah,
Am
I
missing
apologize.
something?
No, but please, if you come in and you're not finding what you're looking for, ask for me, and if I'm around, I'll try to help. But I just heard about the documents for tonight's meeting didn't get posted just before tonight's meeting. So let me know if there are any problems like that. I gave those to the staff that post them, and I was under the impression that everything was posted on Friday. So
Well, I'm sorry to sound confused, but I really tried, and I just thought, well, we were just going to be following the November 5th agenda, so I didn't, so thank you.
Well, so when I downloaded the meeting packet for this meeting, the title or the file name said November
Exactly.
5th. However, the contents were for this meeting. So that's, I think, might be where the confusion was.
Oh, really? So
The
mine,
file name had the same date as the last week,
Yeah.
because when I tried to save it, I've already got that file. I had to name it file number 2, and then I opened it and it had the contents.
yeah,
For
I
tonight's
apologize for that. That was just a mistake in naming the
Okay.
file. But I think we've had some issues with web pages disappearing, and we're trying to sort all that out. And I don't know if that's what happened with tonight's packet on the website. But anyway, do let me know if there are any problems. And also, when you say that you said you did want a printed copy, was that in response to
I would,
Liz Scanlon's email, or?
well, I was in last Friday to pick up the packet so I could have the printed copy.
Okay.
And then I was, and I specifically asked and they said it wasn't ready. And then today I was in, again, I did not specifically ask, but the last time I was in, they just handed it to me because I knew
Yeah.
I should be getting it. So it may have been my fault that I didn't ask today, but then I went online and I didn't go as far as Patrick did to look for it. I just saw the November 5th. So I just wanted to apologize because I was trying to be ready, and then
Okay.
it's very confusing. So
Okay.
I think we're on target now.
So-
Thank you.
And I do apologize to that,
Yeah.
for that confusion, and we'll try to address that next time around.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. So if there's no more questions on the definitions, then we can probably move forward into the use-specific and modification regulations. So the first one being a question, and this responded, I think, some discussion we had last time about forest practices. And so
Right.
there's just kind of basically one provision that was added. This is the bottom of page 3 of the actual code that just clarifies that the forest practices that only involve timber cutting are not a development under the act and don't require a shoreline permit. But if the timber harvest is kind of part of some other development activity, then it might require a permit. And then it refers you to certain WACs. And that is in response to the checklist item 2017E. And I think we'd had some discussions with the city too, just trying to discover how much forest practices are there in the city. And it doesn't seem like that's a big issue that you have timber harvest only, but activities, and more likely there's a little bit of timber harvest associated with the proposed development is the more common scenario.
Question on this. When it says a forest practice that includes activities other than timber cutting may be development under SMA.
Right.
So could you give us an example of what a forest practice that includes activities other than timber cutting might be?
Right. Yeah, if you're clearing a site to build a new single-family home, for example,
Yeah.
then that collective activity requires a permit. If the clearing is in support of a specific development activity, then that requires the shoreline permit, and the timber harvest would be part of that permit. Do you have anything else any other ideas on examples? Or?
No, I think that's what was meant.
Yeah.
That's the primary activity.
So it could include grading in anticipation of building permit. So that's a grading permit is considered a construction permit that
So
as well.
the grading as well as the clearing for a home. But if this is a single-family home, single-family homes are exempt from the SMA. So how would that be covered then?
That would be, go ahead. It'd be an exemption. It wouldn't be exempt from the Shoreline Master Program. It'd be exempt from getting a permit.
That is true.
Yep.
Okay, that's right. You're exactly right, yeah.
Any other questions on the forest practices? Okay. The next item relates to a new, relatively new provision in the RCW and the WAC that provides a mechanism for relief of upland properties and developments when they are within shoreline jurisdiction solely because a restoration activity had been undertaken that then shifted the ordinary high water mark of the water body and thus shifted shoreline jurisdiction onto their property. So that property may still be, it would still be within shoreline jurisdiction, but this is a mechanism where if there's new standards or limitations that suddenly apply to them solely because of this change, that they can get some relief from those standards and that they wouldn't be adversely impacted basically by a restoration project. And this was intended to remove a disincentive for people undertaking restoration projects.
Hi there. I think the strong point of this language is it's very specific, very accurate and clear. I'm wondering if we can make it a little bit more user-friendly to people who might have projects involved in that area. can we refer them to a map that shows the new areas? I think there was some discussion of this last time, and I wanted to see what the follow-up was on
Right.
this.
I think our plan, and we're still kind of working through looking what the city documents are currently available, and then taking a look on the ground to see where ordinary high water mark has landed. But we're going to be presenting, I believe, at the next meeting,
Okay.
our direction and thoughts and suggestions on how to revise the map.
Okay.
So that at least we're caught up to current conditions with what is in shoreline jurisdiction and what's not. The map, though, just sort of a cautionary note, is always just sort of a guideline, and it'll be project-specific, figuring out exactly where the ordinary high water mark is and exactly where the jurisdiction boundary is. But we can get it caught up a lot further with the information that we've been gathering.
Okay, thank you, Amy. And then just to take a step back, please refresh my memory. Where in the shoreline master plan do we tell people, hey, here's how you can get the map?
I think it's included in
Okay.
the code.
I believe there are links in the code, and actually there are maps of the different sections in the code. So I forgot to mention, which I should have at this beginning, you've each been given a binder with the full shoreline management regulations, Title 13 of the BMC. And in 1307 are maps of the entire shoreline jurisdiction.
Okay, are those the maps that we received as part of the SMP, the pretty broad brush maps? I think there are about 10 maps. Let me see if I can pull it up.
Yeah, I believe that.
Okay, and then there will be a place for people to say, hey, I can't really tell from this map what's going on. Here's the link to online.
We don't have so the best place to get detailed information for the public is on our interactive maps, Cobb map.
Which is awesome.
And I don't know that we've referenced that resource in our code anywhere. And
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any reason not to. It's relatively new, so, but I'll look into that, whether there would be any issues with doing that.
Yeah, that would be great if we could reference that. And then when I was poking around, I didn't actually see a version of the map that had these overlays included, but maybe I just didn't see it.
I'm sorry, which overlays are you referring
The
to?
overlays that are in the binder, when I went online to look through the map, I didn't, when I zoomed in, I couldn't see these areas.
Okay, yeah, and I'd be happy to kind of walk you through that. I could
Okay.
probably even do it on the computer when we get through this section.
Perfect.
When you get to Cobb Map, there are different layers that you can select.
Okay, gotcha.
And it's not the most obvious layer to find.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
I wanted to just add, you're remembering correctly, Amy, because I think David, who isn't here unfortunately tonight, was particularly strong about wanting to have it shown on the map. Even though, he just felt that it may not amount to anything, but that it was very important to have it there.
Right. Yeah, and I think the two areas, maybe
Well,
three that we're
we
talking about were
talking about
Horse Creek
yeah,
and then the new side
semantic
channel.
Side
Yeah.
channel.
So I just want to clarify your initial suggestion to include a map. Were you talking about a kind of a conceptual map showing how this might apply, or are you talking about actual maps of where we're going to be looking at whether we need to change the jurisdiction?
I think actual maps, to the extent that it's feasible, I mean, with the disclaimer that these might change, but as specific as we can get for the actual citizens, I think that would be
Okay.
great.
Okay.
I'd point out on a couple of the maps, things like the key and notes obscure part of the shoreline boundaries, like 1307.070-7, the key obstructs a significant portion of the shoreline.
Any other questions related to the relief provisions? Okay. And that basically, that's really pages 4 and 5, has all the details for that process. And at the bottom of page 5, it just notes a reference back to this being related to checklist item 2009A. Okay. So top of page 6 is where we start getting into the very minor. Sorry.
You can use this one if that
Okay.
one's.
Just gotta stop touching it. So basically all of the.
I have a quick question
yes.
on category 3 wetlands.
Mhm.
With the added language, it says, and can often be adequately replaced with a well-planned mitigation project. Where did that language come from?
All of these tweaks came from Department of Ecology's wetland rating manual. So the small number changes related to the points, the text where estuarine, well, I think I might have crossed out estuarine or interdunal wetlands since you don't have them. That didn't come from ecology, but all of the other changes come straight out of the updated manual. And again, they basically just relate to referencing the correct ecology manual number. So it's the 1406029 instead of the earlier version. It incorporates the concept of wetlands of high conservation value as being one of the criteria for a category 1 wetland. Adjusts all of the points. Prior to this, we had the wetland ratings were divided up into a much larger point spread, and they realized, I think through additional study and just sort of statistics and science, that makes it look like these are a lot more finer and precise ratings than they really are, and so they were able to sort of reduce the number of points and have it represent more closely to what this really is, which is just sort of a way to rate things and not a real detailed quantitative math exercise.
So now I have another question. In number 3, the mitigation occurs as part of a City of Bothell approved fee in lieu program.
Number 3. Where are we here?
Sorry.
Oh, is that on page?
That is on page, I think we're on 9. It
Oh,
follows
okay.
it.
I was kind of working through pages 6 and
Did I
7
skip some?
first.
Oh,
Yeah.
excuse me.
No worries.
I think I must have skipped a bunch.
Okay.
Or did I? Yes, I did. I'm sorry, I flipped 2. Let's not go there yet.
Okay.
I'm still
We're
back
almost
on
there.
the adequately placed. Okay, sorry, I
No worries.
put 2 together. Okay.
So just sort of continuing on to page 7, really, again, it's just those points changes, the referencing the correct ecology document, and then a few tweaks in the buffer table, again, just to sort of catch up to the latest point spreads that apply to each of the wetland ratings. And then similarly, page 8, same sort of changes. And all of that links back to checklist item 2016B. And then I think page 8, that's where we first start talking about and made the change to a City of Bothell approved fee in lieu program instead of City of Bothell sponsored. And I think you had sent an email, and I think that we responded to that in some detail, and I believe it was sent out to, was it sent out to the entire board?
It was.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have some problems with that, because this is the one that, basically, ecology is not suggesting this.
Well, the federal agencies and the state agencies are kind of all on board now with a more recent federal rule, and actually it's 2008, that provides a pretty clear mitigation preference hierarchy, which starts with mitigation banks, then in lieu fee, and then finally permittee responsible mitigation based on a watershed approach and so on and so forth. So they're really, really pushing use of in lieu fee and mitigation banking programs for a variety of reasons.
Well, but this is a little different than what we're talking about there, because Bothell doesn't have an approved fee in lieu mitigation program.
Right.
And this implies that they do.
then we probably still need to tweak this language then. So it said Bothell sponsored, and I think the city isn't sponsoring an in-lieu fee program. So that, well, maybe approved helped answer it. If the city approves King County's mitigation reserves program or some other existing or future program, then it would be available to the citizens of Bothell to use.
I feel very strongly about this, so I'm going to continue to track it.
Okay.
Because, for various reasons.
Right.
But in part, to be totally honest, I worked on King County's fee and lieu program many years ago when they were first starting it. I have not been part of it for some years.
Yeah.
But I think it's very important how this is worded. And right now, it sounds as if like Bothell has one.
Okay.
And that is not correct.
No, it's not correct.
And
Agreed.
I do understand, because I had actually, before I had gotten your memo, I had gone to the King County site and read what they had said about it. And it is clear, the Sammamish is a site that can be a receiver site by King County.
Right.
But that's very different from what this is saying.
We can tweak the wording. I don't know if you have a specific suggestion. Our intent was that it be that if the city approves its use, not that it is the city's program, but that it approves citizens of the city or developers in the city to use it. So we can work on the wording of that to make it clear, because the city does not currently, and I don't know that it has plans to, but in the future maybe it would have a program.
In order for the city to have a fee and lieu program, they would have to get it approved by the EPA and the Corps of Engineers.
Right.
And while I think it's a nice thought, that's a lot of work, because at least at King Counties, this is only used for critical areas, and it is only used when it cannot be avoided.
Right.
And so if Bothell is willing to go to all the work for that, then they need to start working on it, but it's a big leap to go that far. And even with all of that, we have to be looking at things like, is it in-kind mitigation? And that's part of King County's as well, is this requirement that it be in-kind. So there's a lot to this. So I definitely want us to look at this language. I am not comfortable with it as it is written now.
So just to fix it, I think what you're suggesting is simply that we'd say that a fee and lieu program that the city has authorized citizens and developers in the city to use, or not that language exactly, but that's the intent, right? Not that it's the city's program, but the city needs to allow people to use the program,
Well,
whoever's it is.
I would think that well, of course, the city, if King County wants to use a site on the Sammamish River as part of their fee and lieu program, the city would have to approve it.
Right, and I think we're talking maybe about two different things right now. So it
That's
sounds like
what
you're talking about developing a receiver site in the city. It sounds like what you just talked about.
My understanding is that the county has designated the Sammamish River as a possible receiver site.
They've designated the Sammamish Basin as a service area, and they've got a few potential receiver sites in the basin. None of those are currently in Bothell.
That's what I understand also, the
But
Sammamish River. Yeah.
the mitigation reserves program is looking for opportunities in local jurisdictions and elsewhere where they could put additional receiver sites. And obviously that would need to be permitted through City of Bothell to construct that. What I was more thinking about is that the program would be used by applicants or developers within the city that have a potential a wetland impact that couldn't be avoided, and then the mitigation hierarchy suggests, at least this is the Corps' EPA's ecologies hierarchy, is starting to look first at using mitigation banks, then in lieu fee, and then on-site mitigation. And this would just allow people within the city who have to go through that process to be able to use an in lieu fee program if it makes sense.
And would it make you feel more comfortable if every time they put fee in lieu, they put the King County, the city allows
Well,
residents to use the King County
That was
fee in
what
lieu?
I was saying. because if there's a, in my opinion, if I'm understanding this, there's a difference between being a receiving site that is using King County's program.
The receiving site basically is King County's program. So King County constructs those projects. Those are the receiving
King County has
sites.
all kinds of application and rules for using this.
Right.
Bothell doesn't have that.
And they don't need to, I don't think. So basically the process is someone.
Maybe I'm not understanding the process clearly.
Right.
So,
Let me see if I can try and explain it. So if an applicant were to fill, let's say, an acre of wetland, and they need to figure out how to mitigate for that, they can't do it on site for whatever reason. They don't own property where they could do off-site mitigation within the basin. Then through one process or another, they would need to look for another mitigation avenue. King County is one example of a entity that has developed an in lieu fee program. They collect money from folks who are having the impact, and then they use that money to implement projects at the receiving site. And so that's completely handled by the county. They're the ones involved in permitting it, paying for it, building it, using the funds collected by applicant impacts.
so currently, does King County do this for other jurisdictions?
Yeah, so any jurisdiction whose code allows applicants, developers, et cetera, within their city to use an in lieu fee program, then King County will work with the applicant to receive the money.
And how can they guarantee that is used in their jurisdiction and not in somebody else's?
Well, that's the, sorry, do you want to say? That's kind of the trick. So some jurisdictions are.
That's exactly
Right.
the trick that I'm talking
Well,
about.
some jurisdictions are very sensitive to mitigation being conducted within their jurisdictional boundaries. Ecologically speaking, that's not necessarily the direction that the agencies are pushing. They'd rather see mitigation be located in the basin or in the watershed where it makes the most sense, and then that's where they're kind of looking for
Yeah,
receiving
and that's
sites.
where I part with the agencies
Right.
and have from a long time, and so do many other of the environmental organizations. So,
Okay.
So,
anyway.
so basically what this is trying to do is enable us to use as receiver sites those programs that the city has
understand that,
approved
yeah.
that are in the basin, that where the impact is happening,
But,
regardless of whether they're within the Bothell city limits.
right, and that's what I am objecting to. I
Okay.
think if we're going to do this, first of all, we don't have it, but it should be only within Bothell. And you can decide whether it's within the sub-basin or where it is, but basin is a watershed is a very large area, and indeed, so is a basin. And there are many groups, the tribes among them, who do not agree with this. So I would not be in favor of adding this language
Well,
as it is written now.
You could, well, yeah, let's discuss that. So you can add language to this if you only want folks to be able to use the in lieu fee program if it has a receiving site within City of Bothell, or, name your basins. That would just kind of further reduce opportunities for applicants to implement mitigation that makes sense at a watershed or a ecological sort of scale, and it pushes people to do perhaps the on-site or in-kind mitigation, which one of the reasons that the feds and the state are promoting banks and in lieu fee programs is because they've seen, they call it kind of piecemeal or postage stamp sort of mitigation sites that are all over the place near the actual impact, but you end up with a very disconnected and fragmented and often not very successful small little mitigation area that ends up, ecologically speaking, not doing as much for the overall system.
I understand the arguments as why people feel this is good. There are many arguments that people make on the other side of why it is not good. And more than once have I disagreed with both the Department of Ecology and the Army Corps of Engineers. So I do not take them as the gospel of how we should do mitigation at all. And secondly, this makes sense for some jurisdictions, but Bothell has very little land left that is not impaired by critical areas, that is there to develop. And so for the city of Bothell to go into a program like this is not, in my estimation, a good idea, because they would be destroying the wetlands that are there that are probably of fairly high value at this point. Because of what little is left, it cannot be. And I, in particular, am talking about up in the North Creek area, this very large wetland. So this is exactly the kind of place where you would not want to apply this. So, no, I don't, this is kind of going around and approving a fee and lieu program for Bothell, but no one is suggesting at this point. They have mitigation banking, yeah.
And those are also not within, I mean, those are similarly, I think the closest one is Keller Farm, which is it's still in process. I think it's getting close.
Pardon
And
me,
that's
I
in,
didn't hear you.
oh, the closest mitigation bank that I'm aware of is in process. Right now is in Keller Farm, which is in city of Redmond. So that's in the Sammamish River, Bear Creek subbasin. That, I think that the currently available receiving site mitigation reserves program is in Woodinville for I think it's I say in one of these documents, I think it's the north, or maybe it was in the email, is it North Creek? Do you remember what, or Cold Creek? I think it was Cold Creek natural area. So that's closer than the mitigation bank. So if proximity was a concern, neither one of those is in the city of Bothell. As I mentioned a little bit earlier too, the Mitigation Reserves Program is looking to partner with cities and other entities to find additional receiving sites. So I think if there was interest or any kind of will to look for and develop a receiving site in Bothell, then this could be something that it might be more appropriate for Bothell folks to use in the future if there was a city of Bothell receiving site.
I would say if they were looking at someplace in the city of Bothell as a receiving site, for example, we use the North Creek, the Fitzgerald area, where they've got very, very extensive and very valuable wetlands, that this might well be viable, but I don't see it as Bothell's using and sending it out to some other site. And I don't know that it can work only one way. So that would be the other very important question is, if you participated in the program, could you simply only be a receiving site and not a sending site? So that's another question.
I don't know that I imagine you could set it up however you wanted to. I think it could be a receiving site and not be a sending site. I think it'd be difficult to find suitable mitigation if you had a receiving site in the city of Bothell and you're having impacts in the city of Bothell, but you're precluded from using the in-lieu fee program, and there's no bank that's in the city of Bothell, then what are you left with?
Allow the mitigation now, and I don't think that is confined, the mitigation bank, I don't believe it's confined to Bothell. Is that correct,
No.
Dave?
It's got a similar service area as the in-lieu fee programs. So as far as an applicant is concerned, or the city is concerned, either way, the mitigation bank or the in-lieu fee program, currently, your receiving site or your bank is all outside of the city of Bothell. There's more potential for receiving sites to be in the city of Bothell than there is for a mitigation bank to ever be constructed in the city of Bothell, is what I think, at least currently. But from kind of the discussion I've heard so far, it seems like a simple fix would just be to add the limitation that you can only use the in-lieu fee program if there is a receiving site in the city. And then that would, I mean, no one would be able to use it until and if and when there is a receiving site in the city. But at least you'd have that option if and when a receiving site were developed.
So I'm not willing to go there quite yet, whether we want to use the fee in lieu in the language, but I will definitely think about that part of it.
And I'd like to come back
Sure.
with some examples of sites that we've identified as sites that could use a wetland bank site or a fee in lieu site where
In the city of Bothell?
that have low-value wetlands that essentially preclude development on a parcel of land where a wetland bank or a fee in lieu option would make some sense, at least from
But that's a wetland mitigation bank?
yes. And when we heard about the Keller Farm Wetland Mitigation Bank, we thought that would be a good option for these, because in the past, we haven't had good options. We've said in a situation, and it's fairly rare that we have a situation where we would say your best option would be off-site mitigation. The first options are to do on-site mitigation if it's feasible, but there are sites where that isn't a good option, and so the only option was for them to develop their own off-site mitigation, and that's a very difficult thing to do.
But in a mitigation bank, the requirement that avoidance is not possible, it may not, that is not one of the requirements for a mitigation bank, to my knowledge, in Bothell.
To use any of the, because if you use a mitigation bank or any mitigation for permanent wetland impacts, you have to get a core permit and ecology approval and all that sort of stuff. And they all require that first you go through and pretty vigorously, especially lately, demonstrate that you've done mitigation sequencing, and the first step of that being avoid, and then minimize, and then only at the very end compensate for unavoidable wetland impacts. So that's built into the process for whether you use a bank in lieu fee or design and build your own mitigation.
But to my knowledge, it's not in the Bothell Code, in the critical areas ordinance.
Mitigation sequencing?
I think, to my knowledge, they added the wording that you can use a mitigation bank, but I'm not sure. I mean, the Bothell says they are using the compensatory mitigation sequencing, but there is nothing. I have seen this used time and time again when there are clearly ways that it can avoid it, and it's just ignored. So there's certainly nothing that spells out that ecology or the Corps of Engineers has to approve this.
Well,
Okay,
I
so-
believe it is, and we'll do our research and come back to the board with
Yeah.
more
You hear the
information on
strong
this.
reservations.
Yeah. It'd be useful to me also to hear if other board members are concerned about this language or see this as an opportunity that Bothell should make available.
I am concerned.
You go.
There we go. I don't have as much experience with this kind of program as Ann does, so my questions will be pretty basic. I think this is an important item to discuss. And Amy, my question is for you. When we talk about setting up a Bothell program that would potentially only allow for receiving as opposed to creating the impacts, how would that setting up happen? Would that only happen within the text of the shoreline management program?
No. So that's a larger city-wide critical areas regulations issue.
Okay.
So this really relates only to any wetland impacts in shoreline jurisdiction. So it's a small part of the city.
Okay, so this would refer back to a program that the city, it sounds like the city does not have.
That's correct.
Right, the city doesn't currently have its own in lieu fee program or mitigation bank.
Okay, so then if we are allowing it in this language, then somebody who wants to refer to how this program would work in the Bothell context, would they only have this to go with?
If I'm understanding what you're saying, then I think so.
Yes, so this is the only guidance that a person in Bothell would have as to how this would work specific to Bothell.
This would, basically, this would tell them that you can use an in lieu fee program, and then I think after that, the coordination with the bank or the in lieu fee program needs to happen between the applicant and that program.
And King County.
And, yeah, and the county, or whoever is, if it's a bank, then some other entity that owns the bank. That happens between the applicant and that entity. And then I think documentation of that agreement, and there's a lot of paperwork involved before you actually secure it. And then that documentation will be provided to the city as kind of proof of their strategy for compensating for the impacts.
Okay, I think I see. So my follow-up question to that is, assume we want to pursue something that you discussed where we could basically only receive the benefits, only receive the good stuff, only receive the mitigation. Who in the city of Bothell would check on that to say, okay, we have certain restrictions on how this program would be used. Somebody using King County needs to check with us first. What kind of check would there be on that process?
I think you'd have to work that out between the city and the mitigation reserves program.
Okay, so that
I don't
sounds
know
like
the
something
answer
we'd
to
want to put in, at least discuss before we continue with this type of language.
So for the city of Bothell to establish a wetland mitigation bank ourselves is a major project that goes way beyond the scope of these code amendments. That would be a programmatic and a decision to make a significant investment, capital investment. So what this language was trying to do was enable us to utilize programs that others have established within the basin.
Okay, but it sounds like, sorry.
And so, again, this could be a recommendation that you make to council to consider this.
Okay.
But it would not be part of these code amendments.
Yes, I'm not talking about creating a new bank. I'm just talking about whatever we decide or whatever council decides as being the limitations on King County's program, how best to express that.
And I'd also like to say that, so before somebody could actually participate in a wetland, a mitigation bank or fee in lieu of program outside of Bothell, the city would have to approve that as part of their application.
Okay.
So it's not a given.
Okay,
There is language here that says that the city staff would have to approve that.
okay.
As a follow-up question, does Snohomish County have an equivalent program?
I don't think they do. I haven't heard that they've developed an in lieu fee program yet. There's more banks up in Snohomish County, and I don't know that any part of Bothell is in any of those banks currently in their service areas, but I can check into that. Because, yeah, this definitely has some limitations on a
Right,
hard
and it
hard
seems
line
like
at King County.
Confusing that you'd apply something that would basically not apply to half of the city.
Yeah, and this just provides folks with an option. On one thing to mention too is all of this language except that one word change is currently in your Shoreline Master Program. So we're not proposing anything new here other than trying to clean up City of Bothell sponsored and trying to turn that into something that didn't sound like it was the city's actual program that it's developed and is implementing. And then maybe just one more kind of anecdote I can throw out as a current experience I'm having right now with a road project in the city of Sammamish. They're removing a culvert, putting in a bridge. There's very little wetland impact associated with that. It's a wider bridge, it's tall, but it's restoring North Fork Issaquah Creek. For a good section, it's creating wetlands. But for those permanent wetland impacts, we're currently have been going back and forth with the Corps of Engineers on the mitigation for that. And even though there's wetland being developed, as a side effect, basically, of removing all this road fill, the wetland developing, the bridge is, 45 feet above the wetland. They are still pushing, and it's been a real challenge trying to get them to just approve the project. They're pushing us to use the mitigation reserves program or some other bank. The city of Sammamish currently has regulations that are very similar to many others that kind of do that standard on-site in-kind preference, and then only off-site if you don't have reasonable opportunities on-site, or there's some other reasons not to, which is really butting heads with Department of Ecology and in particular the Corps. So just sort of a note about how I think the permitting landscape is changing, and it's becoming very difficult, even for a highly beneficial project like the one I was working on, to get a permit that's not pushing mitigation towards a bank or in lieu fee. So just for background.
As an additional follow-up, does the state have an in lieu program statewide, or is it just King County?
Just King County, and I think there's some other jurisdictions and entities that are working on developing those, but it is a long process. Banking takes a long time to put together, particularly because you have to actually build it. And in lieu fee programs also take a long time and require multiple agencies at federal and state level to all agree and figure out how the funding works and how much a credit is going to cost, all those types of things. So it's a huge effort, and it's slowly catching on, but there's not really good coverage yet around the King and Snohomish counties completely.
Okay, I'm wondering about the sequencing of this. So we're changing language here, and there's currently no Bothell approved program. So would that mean that the city council would define what a Bothell approved program is, or would it be staff members on a case-by-case basis deciding whether it's approved or not? Or, is this something where the city should define what a Bothell approved program is, and then we modify the shoreline plan to accommodate that?
Right, and I think some language I've seen in other areas just says it's not necessarily even that the city has to approve it, but that it's a state certified bank or in lieu fee program. So there's kind of other ways around it's still city code and city council saying that they approve use of banks and in lieu fee programs provided they're state certified, but that language wouldn't necessarily require that someone take a specific action. And I don't know if that would be council or how that would go about, but to approve a specific mitigation bank or in lieu fee program. Yeah.
Pat, did you?
So process-wise, how are we going to get over areas like this where there's a lot of discussion? I know on council, when people brought specific language forward, they'd like to see specific change. If they can, if council members could come forward with, language that works for them, that was very helpful. So process-wise, tonight's a study session, so we're all just exchanging ideas and thoughts and learning from each other. When this comes back at the next meeting, is it an action meeting, or how far down the road is action, or we got to figure out how we're going to resolve this internal conflict?
Well, potentially 2 meetings down the road, but and essentially our mandate is to get this through council by the end of June. So that's the time frame that we have to work with. But in our public participation plan, you're looking at it.
Yeah.
When's the first hearing?
The hearing we're suggesting is in March for Shorelines Board.
So 3 meetings down the road.
So we do need to keep chipping away at this and maybe come back next time with some proposed language we would like to see then, or our staff is going to bring back, because you've heard many different thoughts here. How would you come back with, 3 different changes that we pick one from, multi-choice?
Well, I guess what would be useful to me would be to find out what your objective is, not your objection to the particular language here, but what are we shooting for? Do we want to have a mechanism whereby a project that goes through the mitigation sequencing and is determined, not to have feasible options for on-site mitigation, can use programs that have been made available through the state certification process, King County, that are within the service area, and that wouldn't necessarily limit it to King County, because if somebody creates a wetland mitigation bank or a fee in lieu of program in the North Creek Basin and Bothell, the Snohomish County portion, or any portion of Bothell that's within that service area, we could use that. And then through the process, at the staff level, we could make a determination that yes, that is a suitable option for a particular development site. Or are we saying that any proposal that gets to that point to want to do off-site mitigation is going to have to go to council for approval for that decision? We used to have our planning commission and our council and the shoreline board, for that matter, act as a quasi judicial body, but we don't anymore. And I think there are good reasons why we've gotten away from that. So should our direction be to tighten this language up enough so that staff can make that determination, and that we have a limited range of options and some safeguards to make sure that these are viable mitigation sites? That's the sort of feedback I think would be useful to us.
I would like to think about this and come back with some thoughts, if we could, next time, rather than, I think we've had a good discussion about what some of the pros and cons are. I would add one further thought, and that is that kind of the implication from the discussion is that this is the kind of new way of thinking about this. And I have been privy to too many discussions in the last few weeks that would say that we are actually reverting to some of the thoughts about in-kind and on-site. Particularly, I would say this is true in a broader sense, not the specific one. From listening to some of the, I will tell you, I participate in what's called the Salmon Recovery Council, which is the council that is one of the committees of the Puget Sound Partnership. So I sit with 40 or so other entities, all of the resource agencies, the Department of Ecology, the feds, the tribes, everyone is there, the environmentalists. And their big concern right now is looking at saving habitat on every stream that has fish in it, and improving it on the sites where they are. So there's real concern about some of the direction that has been taken in the past, because they're feeling with the climate change issues that we are facing, and the myriad of problems that are coming from the urban areas where some of our prime streams that we need to save what little is there. The argument that was made a number of years ago, which seemed valid at the time, was that you preserve the best sites and don't worry about the not so good sites. And now we're coming back around the other way, and they're saying that it is all of the streams, all of the habitat. We cannot afford to lose any of it because of these drastic changes that are going to take place in terms of stream temperature, and the wetlands are still going to be impacted by this. So that's why I want to struggle with this and think about it some more, because this is my point is there's a major change in thinking that's coming about. So
Just one thing to think
Yeah.
about further too, is just thinking about that, whether a possible limitation on this too would not just be in the city or in the same sub-basin, but maybe this would only be available for those wetland impacts that are not associated with streams or riparian areas that are sort of isolated or, in some other way not at least directly performing functions for streams, or just
That's an
some
interesting
kind
thought,
of,
too. I will think about that, too, as I go through it.
I think we can carve this up in a variety of ways, based on what you guys want to do as a board.
Okay, thanks. Good thoughts. Okay.
And I would like to hear from the rest of the board.
Huh?
Eventually, could be a majority vote issue, so we don't want to necessarily go down one path just
No,
because
that's
of
why I think
a small effect.
I want to kind of back off.
That's
and
why I'd like to
think
hear from the
about-
rest of
yeah.
the board, Ann. Yes.
Yeah, I have everybody.
Excuse me, when are we going to return to this issue? It sounds like we're moving on right now, but we are going to take this up at another meeting. Which meeting would that be?
Well, eventually this will be decided at a public hearing is when
Okay.
we'll take a decision. But I'm not suggesting that we move away from this. I'm suggesting that I'd like to hear get a sense of where the rest of the board stands on this issue. So what we bring back is going to answer all the questions that you have.
Okay, well, I tend to agree with Ann. I would be willing to try to set up Bothell as a receiving site for other communities' mitigation. For example, we're looking at the Wayne Golf Course as a place where we could create new wetlands. And if other communities want to contribute to that process, that would be good. And I think also the point about the Fitzgerald area wetlands is important, that we want to protect those. And, if we can take some of those out of private hands and put them into protected status, I think, that is a receiving site for other communities' efforts. But I think anything we do in Bothell, we want to try to mitigate as close to the site as possible. And we want to try to keep all the salmon runs that we've got. And we recently lost the Swamp Creek run. And I think, if we can try to do mitigation work to get that back, none of Swamp Creek is within the current city limits, but it does pass through part of our municipal urban growth area. So, trying to, create receiving sites along Swamp Creek to make that a salmon stream again, I think would be worthwhile. So, I kind of agree with her that we don't want, our receiving sites to be in Redmond. We want them to be, as close to the disturbed area as possible. And then I don't know if we can do this, but one of the things that I'd like to see us try to work for is a net increase in ecological function rather than no net loss. Because if we stay with no net loss, then all our endangered species stay endangered. And if we want to do recovery, we need to do net improvement. And, if we can structure the fee in lieu program to create a net increase in ecological function, I think that would be valuable. I don't know if that would be considered a take, and we can't do that, but, it might be something where at least, they'd be contributing to a program and there might be matching funds that result in the net increase or some concept like that. So, I'd be very reluctant to say somebody can put in a permit application and city staff can make a decision. And then if we were going to have, a city council kind of pre-approving, what the options are, I'd kind of like to see what those options would be before I feel comfortable saying a fee in lieu program going to those particular receiving sites would be appropriate.
Others?
If no one else has anything to add, I would, to play a bit of devil's advocate here, I see what Amy's saying, that a program could be beneficial to the city of Bothell, perhaps. Let's say the impact is within the city of Bothell and the mitigation falls just outside the city of Bothell, a little bit upstream. I don't want that kind of situation where the ecological benefit could impact city of Bothell positively to be off the table. With that in mind, I think I'm a little more flexible than my colleagues here. My main concern is that there is some kind of safeguard within the city of Bothell that is publicly available where this would be discussed, whether it was a planning commission meeting or a city council meeting where the public could weigh in if possible. I think that is my main concern, whether there's a proper safeguard in place to make sure that this would benefit the city of Bothell. Thank you.
I guess my feedback is that I'd like to get a better understanding of the King County fee and lieu program and mitigations there. And so I'm kind of with Ann to take a step back, bring this up again in January when we had a little more time to research it, get a better understanding of what options are, still allow some flexibility where it's necessary, but as we all know, King County is a very big county and we're a very small footprint in it, so I have some concerns there.
Go ahead.
I think saving and enhancing the wetlands within our own city, if possible, that is a great thing to do. It sounds like that requires changing policy. But as things are how they are now with the policy and not changing them, I'm fine with the change in sponsor to approve.
Yeah, so I'd like to make sure that, yeah, we get the definition clarified, and I think staff had some good suggestions. I'm trying to catch up with all the rest of you still, I'm afraid, and we've got more pages that we're gonna come, and this one paragraph is just talking about type and location of mitigation. Maybe there's other places in the code that we can address some of these other concerns rather than in this paragraph. So I think it's been a great discussion. I think we might need to just move on and get through the rest of it and see maybe we can have more discussion in other areas where we can capture these concerns, and rather than in trying to fix everything in this one paragraph.
Just one thing, but this paragraph is a key paragraph in terms, there's, to my knowledge, and I have actually utilized this just a couple of years ago on a site along the Sammamish where this was exactly the issue. This is really where the core of it is, right here. So it's a good question, but this is both. This is the same language as in the CAO as is here. So this is pretty much it in terms of the mitigation.
Okay.
So thanks, a good thought, but this is the key stuff. So.
Well, I think that gives us some good direction for bringing this back. Maybe not in January because we have kind of a full agenda for January, but prior to the hearing or at the hearing.
All right. So for, I don't know if that's, moving on, I think we're at the midway on page 9. Which is the administration, permits and enforcement section. And this is just a few sort of catch-ups with some cost threshold changes. And we actually just received today, I guess, notification of another cost threshold change, which is not reflected in the text, but I think you provided that. Is that in their packet?
No, not in the packet. I did, I can put it up on the screen, but I can also just describe it pretty simply. This is on page 10. The state has, Office of Financial Management has approved increasing the amount for docks, replacement docks to $22,500 from $20,000. And all other docks goes up to $11,200 instead of $10,000. Yeah, and so that'll be included in any future code language that you get.
And then back to the bottom of page 9, was just an increase in the amount for just a general cost-based exemption. So anything that's $7,047 or less is not a substantial development. And then as you requested in the last meeting, we noted the date that went into effect so that it kind of helps trigger people to look for the new cost number when it goes up if the code isn't quite keeping up with those changes. Okay, we just talked about number 10, so that was just related to cost thresholds for docks when they need a shoreline substantial development permit or simply an exemption. And I think that's it for the exemption changes. Oh, except for there's a brand new exemption, number 17, that was added. This is the middle of page 10. That just says if the project is simply an external or internal retrofitting of an existing structure just for ADA compliance, that you don't need to get a shoreline substantial development permit for that activity. So that's a good change. At the bottom of page 10 is sort of some new clarifying language related to developments which are not required to obtain shoreline permits or local reviews. And I think this is again where we get into a few other things which have been around for a while, the boatyard improvements, et cetera. But the new one, which we've already discussed a little bit, is the WashDOT facility maintenance and safety improvements. And that's what triggered that definition that we discussed right off the top of the meeting. And this is language straight out of the RCW, so there's not much wiggle room in this. Our options really were to put the text in here or just it's automatically in effect and we could just reference the RCW.
Excuse me? Does WashDOT need to do any kind of compliance with the shoreline management program? Are they completely exempt?
I think they have to comply with the SMP, but they don't need a permit or
Okay.
get an official
There's no
formal
local review.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't feel like it's necessary to say that WashDOT does need to comply with the SMP. Is that pretty much clear from this language?
We can consult ecology.
Right.
We did add in the second part of C, the language from the law that says that they have to notify, WashDOT has to notify the local jurisdiction when they're doing one of those approved maintenance and safety improvements that are
Okay.
over $1 million.
If it's redundant, then perhaps we don't need to go down that path.
Yeah, we can talk to the Department of Ecology a little bit further about how they would handle this because they're approving the SMP
Okay.
along with the city. So there's no local review. They don't, I haven't read anything that says that ecology will then review.
Right.
So we can try to track down what happens.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And that brings us to the bottom of page 11, which is just a procedural change. Ecology's tweaked the language so that dates of, let's see, instead of the date that a application is received or a decision is received by Ecology, it's the date that it was filed. So just a slight procedural tweak catching, and that's related to checklist item 2017D. Okay. Oh, and then similar changes in, on page 12, just related to when the different time clocks start. If it's date of filing versus the old days, it was the date something was submitted or transmitted. So it doesn't really have any substantive effect on most projects. And that looks like that's the last of the currently proposed amendments. And then as David mentioned earlier, there's a number of things that we're going to be bringing to you later that deal with streamlining or clarifications and those types of things. Are there any questions about, aside from maybe the in lieu fee issue, other questions on anything we covered? And if you're, on some items, there's more information in the checklist too, so some additional explanation related to the forest practices, the WashDOT facility question, and a few others. And I think we're still waiting to hear kind of definitively from city staff whether they had any concerns in implementing the language in the SMP related to existing development versus, non-conforming, sort of the nuances of the language and how that's working, and whether there's a need to make any future changes.
Could we go back to page 10, where we were talking about the values for docks and the prices are going up again?
Right.
So I'm trying to capture where it explains that these are today's prices, that you got to go look at the RCW to see what the current, is that where you go? You go to the RCW to look up where the current values are?
So I think we say in the top of page 9 that the WAC controls, and that this is meant to try to be consistent.
Yeah,
Where are we on the page?
Page 9 under E.
Middle.
Okay.
middle
Yeah.
of 9.
It says, in all cases, should a conflict exist, the exemptions of WAC 173-27040 shall control.
And for number 1, there is explained a very specific process for that cost amount being adjusted every 5 years based on the Office of Financial Management. And those other ones, the dock thresholds, there isn't a similar sort of 5-year checkup where it automatically adjusts. It's been, the number that it is now has been that number for quite a while.
So where do
So-
we say that we're providing these values for reference only? You really need to go look it up and not rely on these not changing. Do we need another bullet that explains that?
We could add a sentence at the top there that indicates that for the latest information, that the
Either the-
WAC should be consulted.
Okay, and that these are the values as of whenever they just
Yeah.
last changed them.
Yeah, we've got, number 1, we did add the values and it went into effect on September 2nd, 2017. So that's in there, and we could add that maybe to the other ones as well, and then with a specific note, as Lisa mentioned, saying,
Okay.
but check the WAC
Right.
to know for sure.
And in fact, the letter that we received does say that also the value of docks is supposed to be revised every 5 years by
Okay.
OFM.
So
So we could add pretty similar language.
I think she'd be willing to come. Mitigation reserve staff. Yeah, okay. Yes? Okay. One thought we had too is if it would be helpful, we could invite the Mitigation Reserves Program staff person to come to our next meeting, and she could answer all your questions about how it works with service areas and limits you could place and all those types of things. Much better than I could. I just tried to use it a couple times and read the website. But she's been with the program, I think, since it began. You probably know her, Ann, or interacted with her, Megan Webb. I think her name, yeah. It was Megan McNeil for a while. She's been with the reserves program since its beginning, I think.
When they first started setting it up, but that, I think these actually was 2000.
when they started. Yeah.
Starting, and I think my involvement was right about that, which has been quite a while
Okay.
ago. And it is different set of staff.
Yeah. And it did take them 4 years then, because it wasn't in effect until 2012. So it's a long process. Whoops.
Sorry to interrupt. The microphone's up. Ms. Agars?
Oh. So is that something you're interested in? Should I reach out and see if Megan wants to come or is available to come?
Sure.
Sure. Okay.
And that may or may not be at the next meeting, but the next time that we bring this up. So. I think the next thing in the packet is the public participation plan, but since we touched on it, just as kind of a teaser, this isn't meant to, it's not quite ready for full discussion, but we've got a partial list of some of the clarifications, the readability amendments that we're planning to bring to you next time. So this is just a list of what some of those are. So I'll pass that out for your for you to review if you wish before the next meeting. And I also am awaiting further responses on this from other development review staff that deal with this on a more regular basis. So it could expand before we bring it back to you.
I have a couple of questions about the public participation plan, if now is the right time to discuss? Or are we discussing?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to give you this while we were talking about code amendments, and then, but go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So I really like the fact that we already have a plan for who we're going to tell about the public hearings. And I just wanted to get a sense of how many individuals or businesses are on the mailing list that you mentioned in the public participation plan.
Well, we don't have a mailing list per se today. We have a contact list. Most of our
contact
communication is going to be via email. And so it'll be what's in the plan, plus anybody who expresses an interest in getting notification
Okay.
during the process.
Okay, are we going to perhaps take a look at any contact lists that were created during the last SMP update process and add those people?
We could, those, I mean, could be significantly out of date, but I can, yeah, we can draw on those and
Okay, great. And just, I'm curious, what kind of public participation did we get last time from the folks who were on the board last time?
the one person that was on the board last time isn't here.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
But our consultants are here, so, and if you,
We had a shoreline survey, as I recall, that had, I think, over 100, maybe 150, could be more than that. And then we had workshops at 3 locations for each shoreline. So at the senior center on the Sammamish River, there's a little restaurant on North Creek. I can't recall where we were. Oh, we were at a school near Swamp Creek. So there was an attempt to go to the different locations, and I believe we had decent turnout.
Yeah.
They exceeded staff and consultants, so that was good. And then, as I recall, there were a number of hearings, and we got public comment. There's a summary, I think, from that time period that we can point out.
Anne was at most of our
I know,
meetings.
I remember attending the one at the restaurant, and that, we have really quite good participation at the restaurant. But that was a major rewrite to the
Okay,
master
yes.
program, which is a little bit different. I have a question regarding these clarifications. I think these are good points that you brought up. And as you remember, I had also proposed, which is really not a clarification, it really is a change, this reduction in the buffer area in exchange for riparian vegetation. So it's not under the clarification category, it really would be a change. So I don't know if it would be appropriate to add in here. These are really still more within the framework of what we're doing to the master program. And the other really is a comp plan change.
Yeah. So, yeah, these are non-substantive
Right.
clarifications.
And that would be
That would,
substantive.
I'm gonna touch on that in our discussion, old business discussion, about how we do need to talk a little bit about how we're going to bring, you know, any items that you want to suggest to council to
Yeah.
add to the 2019 planning docket
Yeah.
in the next couple of meetings. So I wanted to
Okay.
start that discussion tonight, and then
Good.
we'll probably need to make some decisions about that at the January meeting.
Good, thank you.
Lisa,
Do we wanna
did you want
cover-
to, was there anything you wanted to walk through on that?
Maybe the flow chart.
Oops, what happened here? Well, let's see if I can.
So I think you covered the program last time, right, Dave?
Yes.
Okay, so there was just, we're missing half of our,
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure what happened here.
I think, on the right,
Sorry, maybe you should.
right, and go to the left of that little, no, the left of the,
Wanna try?
There we go, that helps. Go ahead, and while I fumble around here.
okay. Well, in the public participation plan, there were two changes. On page 3, under adjacent jurisdictions, we added the city of Kirkland. Otherwise, the list that's in the, in that chart is basically the same as last time. And then we mostly changed the flow chart to reflect when the Planning Commission and Parks Board may come and what the schedule would be for considering map changes. So I'll just start. So we're on the bottom left, December. So draft code amendments for periodic review. Then we hop up to January. And so this is where we'll bring back the readability, streamlining amendments, and the map amendments. And that, Dave, I believe someone will be here from Parks to speak to the Wayne Golf Course, is that right?
Yes, so since one of the major map amendments is on the former back nine at Wayne, Tracy Perkowski of our Parks Department will be coming to explain what sort of conditions have been placed upon the various properties that were purchased with the Wayne Golf Course, and also what requirements some of our funders have for future development of that.
And then in February, there would be a joint meeting where the Shorelines Board would host the Planning Commission and the Parks Board. So the idea is that between tonight on the periodic review changes and then in January on the readability and the map changes, you will have at least had a review of all the elements that are in your charge. Then you'd have a joint meeting because there's some interrelated issues with Parks and Planning Commission. And then the idea would be to have the Shorelines Board hearing in March with your recommendations. Then in April, the Planning Commission would review and make their recommendations. And Dave, I believe their focus is more on the relationship to critical areas regulations.
Yeah, so your recommendations on Title 13 don't go, they go directly to council, but some of the critical areas amendments that we're making also have to be mirrored in Title 14, which is the Planning Commission's purview. So the joint meeting scheduled in February should be the place where we kind of introduce those, the Planning Commission to those amendments so that they can move forward with their related hearing.
And then the idea is to conclude with council deliberation in May. That gives you a 1-month buffer before the decision in June. So the points at which we would be focused on gathering broader community input would be in association with your joint meeting. We'd advertise that there would be an open house ahead of the formal meeting, and then you'd host the 2 other commission and board. Then we could also use that as an opportunity to mention your March hearing, and then there'd be notice that would go out about that as well. With that February open house, we could have materials like the proposed map adjustments. We could also have a fact sheet explaining the nature of the periodic review and what the city's considering, so that February would be an opportunity for folks to learn about what's happening and hear some of the discussion about all the components, and then in March be more ready to give comment if they have any.
If in the advertisement for the February meetings, we could mention the 3 magic words, Wayne Golf Course, I think that would get a lot of people out, and I would like to see that happen. Thank you.
On the adjacent jurisdictions, would it make sense to invite all the Sammamish River communities, so like go all the way to Redmond and get them involved, and then also going upstream in North Creek, as far as Everett, to get those communities involved. And I think Swamp Creek goes up into Linwood, so may want to let the folks in Linwood know that we're working on their creek at the
downstream
middle
end.
reach. Yeah, well, we're not at the end because Kenmore's down at the end, but we've got a reach in the middle that we're responsible for.
That should be doable.
And I don't know if we want to go, to Lake Sammamish and beyond. That may be going too far.
Okay.
And I'd also say the Tulalip tribes have taken an interest in what we're doing here, so it would be good to invite them.
The Muckleshoots have an interest in this.
Yeah, well, Muckleshoots are listed. I was just thinking,
are they?
add the
Okay, I see.
Tulalips.
Okay, I missed that, yeah. Yeah, I believe the last time Karen Walters did reply to the last shoreline changes, so she's quite good about reviewing them.
So I think we can make those additions. Anything else, Dave, that you have on outreach?
No, if there's not any other questions about the program, we will be submitting this with I think I'm going to try to do a progress report to Ecology by the end of the year, and so that'll include this as the public participation plan, which is part of our requirement with ecology.
Another question, are there businesses that lease in the shoreline area? I'm thinking maybe a business like What's Up that does paddleboard rentals. They care what we decide to do, and they may not actually own property here.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but yeah, we can certainly reach out to them.
Like our local business parks, owner occupied, or is there like a big management company that leases space out, or how do they work?
Yeah, well, we're working with Canyon Park Business Association right now on the Canyon Park plan, so we'll let them know that this is going on. I'm quite sure they're aware that it's happening, but may not be at the top of their radar screen. Anything else? Okay.
So does that bring us out of the study session then? Are we ready for the minutes and old business?
Oh, yeah. Let's go ahead with
Yeah.
minutes, and I'll organize my thoughts on the old business.
Yeah, just one thing on the minutes that I wanted to point out, and that is that we did change the bylaws, and perhaps this should be reflected in the minutes, to state that, I've got to find that second, that we do not, that the chair can, let's see, he cannot make a motion, but he can second a motion. I got to find what I did with it.
That's not part of the bylaws. That's part of Robert's Rules of Order.
Whatever it was in, we changed it. And I'll find the spot in a second. I thought they had this all done. Okay. It's under Article 4, Duties of Officers. And it says, it said, Robert Rules of Order notwithstanding, the chair shall be a full voting member of the board and be able to participate fully in its activities with the exception of making motions. And we changed that to say making motions, we struck seconding motions.
I don't recall that.
I think it was Pat that brought that up.
Yeah, I just asked why it was not consistent with the council procedures, so.
Okay, it's coming back to me now. Okay.
Okay, so I think that was the main thing. Is anybody else have any additions? I guess the only other comment I would have on the minutes is, yes, they are brief, and they basically consider just specific actions that were taken. And so when it says study session and then it says discussion ensued, I wondered if we should have anything more there, but Amy did a beautiful job putting things together and tracking it all. So, but I didn't know if we should somehow qualify that to say we discussed the Wayne Golf Course and the designations, or just list things, but that I wasn't sure how you wanted to do that.
We have, all of the boards and commissions have kind of adopted this
Kind of,
very abbreviated
Yes,
form of minutes that focuses on the actions, and then we refer folks to the videos online to get the full picture. So
and I assumed that that's what was happening, but I thought perhaps the one exception I thought of was we'll cover this, I'm sure, next time. I think we specifically asked, for example, for some better maps for Wayne Golf Course. because the ones that we had just really weren't taking care of being able to follow what was really happening.
Yes.
But again, it's something I'm sure will come. And then the only other example I could give was exactly this issue that we brought up about David Cox, where we basically came to a consensus that we wanted to show on the maps if there had been a change in jurisdiction. And so we did have, it wasn't we didn't vote on it per se, but it certainly was a strong consensus that we had come to. And that was kind of the main emphasis that I was wondering whether that was, should at least be mentioned.
I'm not quite sure I'm following what it is you're referring to.
Okay, when we were discussing on the checklist about how you handled issues where, for example, on Horse Creek or from the side channel of the Sammamish River, where the jurisdiction of the 200-foot ordinary high water mark might
Okay.
have changed. And we did come to basically a consensus that we didn't want to just leave that up in the air. We did want it to show somehow on the maps and be noted. So I didn't know if that it was kind of that gray line between an actual vote, but we were quite clear about that, just like we were clear that we needed some better mapping and information on the Wayne Golf Course.
So we will be bringing that back to you in the January meeting. That'll be one of the main topics of that meeting, is going over those
I
map
understand
changes.
that, but I'm just talking about the minutes reflecting perhaps a bit more than just that there was a discussion. So, but I understand that you don't want to get into details.
Well, they're the board's minutes, so if you have specific additions that you'd like to insert, then we can do that, but going forward, we'll follow the procedure that we discussed last time about getting those to you, so you have time to make make some specific amendments. But but are you and I've already made a note that we'll
Definitely the one on
on the
terms
bylaws,
of making
yeah.
a motion was one that we did make a decision on, and I don't know how the rest of the board feels about adding anything under the discussion.
Well, for one, the change wasn't made in the bylaws. I mean,
No, it
wasn't struck. In the copy that I'm looking at here in our packet,
Yeah,
it's not struck the two words, making, and the words "and seconding" was struck, right? And that was,
So, yeah, I've
Okay.
made
Yeah,
that
so
note
that-
here.
that'll be
so-
fixed. But I would agree that substantial changes that we made probably should be reflected in the minutes. If we did it for the secretary's responsibilities, we probably should have done it for the other substantive changes. Unless the list becomes very long, then it would become cumbersome, but it's just, how do others feel? We want to be,
Well, I think in going with the general consensus that rather than populating the discussion details and trying to pick out the appropriate things that are important in the notes, maybe to put a link in the meeting notes to where the recording is.
Okay.
and Dave did put a link for us for the recording on our-
Yes,
yeah.
yes, and I know the link exists because I followed through with it, but that would prevent
Or you mean,
having Amy having to decide what's the most important, what are the highlights of the meeting.
when you could even put a time in it or something.
Right.
Yeah, and then, I don't know if we still have a kind of strikeout version of the bylaws, but, a link to that, so we could see which changes we adopted, rather than just having the final bylaws that you passed out this time.
Yeah, this was more for your benefit, and But yeah, I could add those, the strike through. So what I've heard, let me make sure I've got this right, that we're going to, in the amendment of bylaws text there, we'll reference the change that, that we struck, or the language saying that the chair cannot second motions, so enabling the chair to second motions. We will add, and we'll just make this a standard part of the bylaws, the link to the video. And I'll make the change in the bylaws and attach the strike-through version of the bylaws to the minutes. Is that
Okay, so do you want to just have them come back at the next meeting then for the final adoption?
I would suggest that you approve the amendments as revised, as discussed. That way we can get them on post them on the website.
Well, I think that's where we fell short last time, was being very explicit when we make the motion exactly what we're approving. So,
I guess that was what I was trying to summarize there.
Yeah. Yeah, I move to adopt the minutes as amended, as Dave Boyd just spelled it out.
I'll second.
there's been a motion by Board Member Bain and second by Board Member Orr to approve the minutes as amended, as captured by Dave Boyd's conversation. They can review the tape and figure that out, because I can't play that back. Is there for further discussion? Seeing none, if all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously with Board Member Cox absent.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us to old business. So I just wanted to have a brief discussion. We've gotten a couple of emails from Board Member Agard about potential items to forward to council for consideration in the 2019 planning docket. And I just want, it would be, along with the questions of staff and consultants, and it would, our preference would be that these suggestions get discussed by the entire board and
That was
the
my
entire
intent,
board
yeah.
give direction. So we can do some of that tonight if you wish, or what I would like to do is make that a specific part of the agenda in January
I would too.
to discuss any issues that have come up that the board, or that any board members would like to add to the 2019 planning docket, and then have the board vote on which of those they'd like to move forward.
Any opposition?
That's wonderful, thank you.
Dave, I know that there have been a lot of questions about the purchase and sale agreement for the Wayne Golf Course. I actually did a bunch of research and found answers in the agenda that you sent me. And my fingers were itching to hit reply all and tell everyone, oh, look, I found this. I know we're not supposed to do that. If I have information or follow-up questions that I'd like us to discuss for the January meeting, shall I just forward them to you and allow you to add them to the agenda?
That's fine, or if you can share with the rest of the board now, and if, you know, and this would be the opportunity for the board to give direction to staff about items that they'd like to see us bring back.
Okay, well,
as opposed to individual board members.
I'm prepared to go and talk about this. I don't want to impose on anyone's time, but I'm prepared to talk about the couple of questions that I had, the answers I found, and the follow-up questions that I'd like to see discussed. But
Could we take a quick break before we start?
yes, I'm
Go for it.
fine to leave
there
it
any-
for later, too.
All right, so let's take a 5-minute break.
Yeah.
All right, we'll be on break, the Shoreline Board will be on break for 5 minutes.
Okay,
So come back at 8:10, right?
as long as it's still convenient. kayaking.
I'd like to reconvene the Bothell Shoreline Board meeting. I'll turn the floor over to Sarah Gustafson with her questions.
Great. So my first question regarding the Wayne Golf Course, specifically the back 9 of the Wayne Golf Course, was why did 5 acres get separated out as potential active use property? And it appears that this was actually envisioned between the city of Bothell and Forterra in advance. Forterra, in its agreement, had said that this land could potentially be given to active uses such as canoeing, public recreation, even a restaurant or motel. And the reason why I bring this up is because I trust Forterra. I think they have good intentions. And if they have in advance thought through the fact that these 5 acres might be given to some kind of active use, then that is something that we might want to really look into.
I'd add to that, the city did a visioning process,
Right.
and it identified 4 acres on the front 9 and 4 acres on the back 9 for development for active use. And the reason it went to 5 was purely financial.
Okay.
That, the city decided to stop raising grants and pay for some of the land itself, and then it realized it didn't have enough money to pay for all 8 acres. So the bank said, well, you need to keep collateral, so you have to set aside these 5 acres for the part you haven't paid for yet. So those 5 overlap with the 4 that the vision plan called for using for active use.
Okay,
And
great.
then probably 1 acre of that will go back to natural use or remain in natural use, because the way it's set up now, that acreage on the back 9 is in conservation status, but the city's reserving the right to buy it out of conservation status and put it back into development.
Okay, thank you. I did not realize that the collateral was an issue, and I appreciate that information.
All of Sarah's questions have been forwarded to park staff, and that's already programmed for discussion at the January meeting. So what I was getting at in terms of these any additional issues that we want to that the board may want to forward to City Council as part of the 2019 planning docket. If there were any others that any members wanted to put out there that kind of haven't already been entered into the record, or so that we can be prepared to, at that meeting, have a final discussion and forward items to the board. So we'll have an opportunity to have a more full discussion on Wayne Golf Course with park staff in January.
Great. Well, with that said, perhaps it would be best to leave the rest of my discussion for then. I do have 2 additional questions that I would like to add to the January agenda then, so that research can happen on them.
Okay.
And the first is that I understand that the city will purchase back those 5 acres from King County for $51,000. That would be after the Conservation Futures Grant is applied. But this $51,000 cost, which is pretty low, assumes that the land would remain as passive use. It seems to me that if it were to revert to active use, the cost would be much higher, and I'd like some estimate of the cost.
Okay.
Let me know if you have any questions.
Good question.
Okay. And then my second question would be regards to the buyout that David mentioned to convert to active use. And I saw that this would have to go through an appraisal process for the actual cost of buying out the easement. So this would be a second cost on top of the actual land. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I'd like to see an estimate of the cost to the city of buying out that easement, and also some information on the timeline. What would it look like with regards to buying out that easement? And that's it.
And this is all with regard to the 5 acres on the back 9, or?
Yes, because it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that aside from it was 5 acres, the rest of it, AKA the phase 1 of the back 9, is already kind of set. There's not as much questions about it.
Okay. So I think that is all within the scope of what Tracy is
Okay.
prepared to come.
Okay, great.
I had a couple of questions. They're probably within the scope of what will be discussed, but I just will bring them out. One is, I believe that part of this back 9 of the phase 1 of the back 9, not the phase 2 with the 5 acres. Part of that was purchased with the Salmon Recovery Board funds, and some with the conservation futures. Is that correct? So I would like to know if those are actually, if you can show that on a map, what are the parts that were actually purchased with the salmon recovery funds? Because to me, that I doubt that it overlaps with the 5 acres, but if it does, that could create some kind of an issue. That is, what funds were used when it was purchased may dictate to some extent. I mean, what it flows into your questions, essentially. What would that new price be?
Yes.
Yeah, is that right? And the second thing is, I've seen some mapping where they said that on the west side of Waynita Creek, there was a 200-foot buffer, and on the east side, there was a 150-foot buffer. And I don't know where that comes from. So I don't know if there's a floodway on it that has established that buffer or what. So where does that buffer come from on Waynita Creek? And then the third thing is, as we've discussed this, really the part within the shoreline jurisdiction is just a very small corner of it. So as much as possible, what is the amount of that land? I mean,
The area of that land?
yeah, that area that we're talking about, because it seems to be, it's very, very little. And I would think there could be some fairly easy, resolutions to the issue in terms of the designation.
Okay, and that truly is the scope
Yeah.
of the Shoreline Board's deliberations with regard to Wayne Golf Course. Is the designation of that, what currently is shoreline residential, and redesignation of that.
Yeah,
And
then
what
I
the
also-
implications
yeah.
are of that. So.
And in my questions, I also just raised the question about this ADA accessible, because I think at some point it was discussed, well, this would need to be impervious surface. Well, it doesn't have to be ADA accessible. So I don't think the issue of whether or not it's pervious or impervious surface, even if it were within, say, an urban conservancy, I don't think that that's a problem. But I want to make sure that that's understood. So. Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay.
I've got something. Could we have city staff report to us on the health of the various reaches?
Health of the various reaches?
Yeah, so, like how's North Creek doing in different stretches, and how's the Sammamish River doing in different stretches, and how's Swamp Creek doing?
Is that something that our consultants can help with, or?
We did some reach assessment back in the original SMP update. I don't know if you've been able to look at any of those documents, and we did break it down into reaches and had fairly detailed summary of conditions by a variety of factors for those. And I don't know how much they might have changed in the past, however many years, it's been 6 years now. So that would be one place to go. And then otherwise, we could just sort of do a quick search of other existing, more recent studies and see if we can kind of supplement some of that information. I think a lot of it's probably remained fairly stable, so I'll double check like the Department of Ecology, water quality listings and see if there's changes there, because those I know are reflected. So we can do a few things like that, I think, fairly simply.
I second that.
Is there general interest on the board in that? Anything else?
Okay, so next item is that it? Okay, reports from staff is the next
that's
item. All right, reports from members. All right, so I will accept the motion to adjourn. If there's nothing other good for the order.
I have a quick question. On this meeting in January about possible code amendments that you brought forth, can those be written to you if we don't have them tonight? And I know you want them as soon as possible, but.
Yeah, if you have suggestions, to add to this list, yes, feel free to send them on to me.
Yeah, I probably around the 1st of January will surface, if that's okay, shortly after. I don't have them right now.
Yeah.
I've got some of mine, but I need to get more detail on them.
So, yeah, the sooner the better, but I'm also out the 22nd through the 3rd, so
Yeah, okay.
21st through the 3rd.
Is there anything else for the good of the order? Motion to adjourn would be,
I move we adjourn the meeting.
is there a second? I can second that. Motion by council member, or board member Orr, second by board member Ewing to adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.